The crystalline lattice of the grand conclave shimmered under the light of the central void lamp, casting razor-thin shadows across the assembled delegates of the Kyler hegemony. The air, artificially calibrated to the precise density required for optimal vocal resonance among the varied attending dignitaries, thrummed with a low, subsonic anxiety that even the most disciplined minds struggled to suppress. Before the high censor, the polished obsidian dais that symbolized ultimate authority, stood the holographic projection of the newly designated anomaly, a solar system designated Sector 7 Gamma Niner, currently exhibiting unauthorized, extremely rapid technological maturation, culminating in the emergence of a civilization that had crossed the threshold of interstellar capability with unprecedented, almost violent speed. The sheer audacity of their ascent, a chaotic, localized burst in the quiet expanse of the galactic rim, offended the deep, ancient symmetries that governed Kyler understanding of cosmic evolution. The projection shifted, focusing not on the system's energy signatures, which were chaotic and inefficient by hegemonic standards, but on the single dominant planetary body, Earth. The very name, guttural and simplistic, felt like an insult to the long, measured history of sentient life. Elder Vizier Thraxis, his carapace the color of aged bronze, adjusted the sensory filters over his primary optical clusters, trying to impose order on the visual data streaming in from the outer perimeter probes. The assessment remains unchanged, Thraxis's voice resonated, layered with the controlled disdain of millennia of established dominance. Their transition from localized conflict matrices to rudimentary warp-capable vessels spanned less than 3 standard centuries. A statistical impossibility under normalized evolutionary pressures. They are either infected by some unknown mutagenic cascade, or they possess a fundamental, inherent instability that renders them dangerously unpredictable. The delegate from the Viridian Accord, a being composed of highly structured, slow-moving crystalline flora, shifted its mass, the movement causing the floor panels near its designated locus to emit a faint, grinding protest. Instability is a weakness, Vizier, the Viridian delegate projected, its thoughts rendered into resonant harmonic frequencies that bypass the need for crude vocalization. But rapid acquisition of power suggests an equally rapid rate of internal self-destruction. Why expend hegemony resources attempting to understand a species that will likely fracture itself into stellar dust before we are forced to intervene? Their initial communications, crude pulsed electromagnetic transmissions, suggest a foundational dependency on illogical emotional constructs. Fear, aggression, attachment to biological decay. The air in the conclave grew colder, reflecting the collective unease. The Kyler valued logic, deep temporal planning, and the subjugation of entropy. These Terrans, or humans as they called themselves, seemed to embrace entropy as a guiding principle. They burned resources with abandon, engineered conflicts over abstract concepts like territory or ideology, and their dominant form of governance seemed to shift based on the emotional state of large segments of their populace. It was, to the ancient, ordered minds of the hegemony, not just primitive, but offensively chaotic. High Censor Vorlag, the apex authority whose lineage stretched back to the first unification, allowed a period of profound silence to settle, letting the cacophony of lesser concerns fade into the background hum of the chamber. His thoughts, vast and complex, were broadcast only to the most senior advisors present. Patience. The anomaly is noted. Its proximity is concerning only because it violates the established parameters of the sector buffer zones. We have observed thousands of emergent civilizations. Most require centuries of slow integration or managed subjugation before they achieve interstellar viability. These beings skip steps. They leap. Vorlag directed his attention towards the tactical projection table, where the known operational profile of the nascent human fleet was rendered in stark, unflattering contrast to hegemony standards. Their starships were jagged, functionally inelegant affairs, relying on brute force reaction drives rather than the smooth, harmonically balanced inertia manipulators favored by the hegemony. Their shielding technology appeared crude, designed to deflect rather than integrate incoming energy profiles. Their vessels are loud, Vorlag projected formally, his tone perfectly modulated, stripped of internal nuance. They announce their presence through the very fabric of space they displace. Yet their primary defense seems to rely on projecting overwhelming, immediate kinetic force. A barbaric methodology, yet effective against their known rivals within their own cradle system. The debate continued in measured, dangerous tones for several further cycles. The Kyler were masters of intricate bureaucracy and slow-moving consensus. The sheer speed of the human ascent necessitated an uncharacteristic acceleration of their deliberation process, which only amplified the underlying tension. They discussed quarantine protocols, the ethics of preemptive sterilization, a standard response to unpredictable, rapid evolution, and the political ramifications of ignoring a species that had already claimed territory near the agreed-upon demarcation lines of the old empires. The fear was not that the humans were inherently malicious, but that they were fundamentally unpredictable. An unknown variable of such potency could destabilize the delicate, millennia-old balance of power maintained by the hegemony and its allied blocs. Then the sensors registered the shift. Not a fleet movement, not a tactical broadcast, but an entirely new layer of communication. It was not the crude radio bursts they had been monitoring, nor the encrypted subspace chatter they had tried and failed to decode through standard algorithmic mapping. This signal was direct, focused, and seemingly targeted at the hegemony's central communication nexus, penetrating layers of shielding and jamming designed to be impenetrable to civilizations of less than Type IV status. The delegates recoiled internally. How? Their systems were based on manipulating the zero-point field. Any breach suggested a level of mastery over fundamental physics that contradicted every prior reading of human capabilities. Elder Vizier Thraxus stared at the incoming data stream, his chitinous appendages trembling almost imperceptibly. Sensor Vorlag, the inbound communication is not a challenge. It is a standard hail, a request for official first contact protocols, phrased in universal standard galactic dialect, a dialect we have not broadcast in the outer rim for 500 cycles. The shock rippled through the chamber. They had been observing the humans for decades, believing them to be isolated, provincial. Now, the primitives were speaking the language of the galactic mainstream, using communication standards refined by the elder races themselves. Vorlag silenced the chamber with a thought command. Allow the transmission to resolve. Do not respond. Let us observe the nature of their presentation. The air crystallized around the projection dais. The chaotic data stream resolved itself, shedding the noise of its transit across unimaginable gulfs of space, until a single, clean image appeared above the obsidian stone. It was not a complex, multi-limbed delegate. It was not a flashing array of technological superiority. It was a single vessel, utterly alone, positioned precisely at the designated observation threshold established by the Kyler centuries prior. It was massive, dwarfing any known light cruiser in the hegemony's vast armories, yet it possessed an unnerving stillness. It did not utilize the characteristic energy-dampening cloaking fields common to advanced scouts. It was simply there, massive, dark, and utterly unconcerned with being perceived. It looked less like a vessel and more like a shard of solidified night suspended against the void. And then the voice. It bypassed the translation matrix entirely, arriving directly in the auditory centers of every sentient being present, rich, deep, and resonating with a strange, unsettling quality of absolute certainty. It was the voice of a creature entirely comfortable with its own existence, devoid of the hegemony's characteristic harmonic modulation that sought to imply authority. This voice simply was authority. To the governing body of this sector, we transmit this initial address. We are the Sol Confederacy. We have arrived at the appointed border. Our presence is not hostile, nor is it provisional. We extend a formal unilateral overture for organized diplomatic engagement. We require one designated locus for immediate, secure rendezvous. Our primary vessel, designated Resolution, awaits instruction. The sheer directness was paralyzing. They did not ask permission. They did not offer tribute. They stated their arrival, described their vessel in stark, unambiguous terms, and demanded a location for dialogue. It was the language of equals, or perhaps superiors, delivered by a species the hegemony had categorized as barely emerging from planetary warfare stages. Elder Vizier Thraxus finally found his voice, laced with a rising pitch of controlled alarm. Censor this display of operational capability, the deep space transit, the mastery of dialect, the sheer physical scale of that vessel. It invalidates every metric we possess. They have achieved Type II status without observable intermediate steps. They have hidden their evolution entirely. Vorlag slowly inclined his massive head, the gesture signaling a decision of immense gravity. If they have hidden it, Vizier, it was not through tech. Ethnological means we could detect, but through philosophical concealment. They presented themselves as chaotic and simple while mastering the fundamentals of the void. We will not retreat. We will not respond with immediate aggression. That is the primitive's response. We will meet their resolution. He paused, allowing the weight of his decree to settle upon the fearful assembly. Prepare the Arbiter Prime. Send an escort contingent of 3 ceremonial destroyers. Let us see what manner of logic dictates such a terrifying leap across the gulf of development. The journey to the rendezvous coordinates was conducted under a veil of intense, suffocating scrutiny. The Kyler flagship, the Arbiter Prime, was a testament to ordered power, a vessel miles long, sheathed in self-repairing reactive plating, powered by carefully contained singularities, its architecture favoring smooth, mathematically perfect curves designed to minimize environmental disturbance. It moved through the darkness with the silent grace of a predator confident in its domain. The escort contingent maintained strict formation around it, their operational readiness at maximum alert, their tactical cores cycling through threat assessments at frequencies that would have induced immediate psychosis in a lesser species. Within the command nexus of the Arbiter Prime, the internal atmosphere was taut. The observation screens displayed the human vessel, the Resolution, patiently holding position. It did not attempt to probe, scan, or even adjust its orientation to the Kyler arrival. It simply existed, an inert block of profound technological statement. Ambassador Laris, assigned the delicate, potentially terminal task of leading the diplomatic mission, stood before the main tactical holodisplay. Laris was a veteran of countless first contacts, known for his ability to dismantle hostile agendas through meticulous dissection of their stated goals. Yet, facing the Resolution, his usual intellectual confidence was frayed. He studied the vessel's profile. It possessed minimal visible energy emission. No drive signatures, no weapon charging signatures, no broadcast chatter. It was dark, utterly silent, absorbing the intense, probing sensor sweeps the Kyler were directing at it. Its mass displacement signature is inconsistent with its visible volume, Laris noted, his voice low, speaking to the 2 specialized anthropological advisors flanking him. The sensors report a material density far exceeding even our stabilized neutronium alloys, yet its external form suggests a much lighter composition. It is either employing some form of localized gravitational manipulation on an unprecedented scale, or the vessel is constructed of a material that defies standard elemental classification. The anthropological advisor, Xylath, shifted uncomfortably. Xylath specialized in the study of cultural stress points, the foundational inconsistencies in a species, psychology that could be exploited during negotiation or subjugation. Ambassador, the challenge remains their speed. They possess no discernible cultural foundation to support this technological leap. A species requires millennia to develop the social cohesion, the ethical framework, and the sheer intellectual capacity to manage such power sustainably. Their historical records suggest they were engaged in internal strife, massive, self-inflicted extinction events, only a few generations ago by their own reckoning. Where is the missing period? Where is the long, slow climb? Perhaps, the second advisor, Rithos, murmured, his optical clusters focused on the energy readings. They do not climb. Perhaps they simply are. Consider the possibility that their evolution does not follow the universal slow accretion model. They appear to value abrupt, decisive action over measured planning. If they bypassed the slow accumulation of knowledge and instead focused all resource allocation, all societal focus, on raw problem-solving efficiency, this outcome becomes mathematically plausible, if profoundly terrifying. Laris nodded slowly. The terror was real. The Kyler believed in the sanctity of process, the slow, meticulous refinement of civilization. These humans, by their very existence here, implied that process was optional. We proceed according to Vorlag's directive, Laris stated, straightening his ceremonial robes, which were woven with conductive filaments designed to subtly project an aura of serene intellectual dominance. We will offer them parity for initial dialogue, nothing less, nothing more. We must ascertain their intent without provoking a commitment of force. If they are as capable as their arrival suggests, a single hostile exchange could result in systemic hegemonic damage across this rim. A small launch bay on the Resolution cycled open. It was not a grand deployment, no massive dropship or intimidating armada of escort fighters. A single shuttle emerged, sleek and utterly black, presenting a minimalist, almost utilitarian profile. It possessed no visible weapon emplacements, no elaborate sensor arrays, no external hull ornamentation. A vessel designed solely for conveyance. It accelerated toward the Arbiter Prime with a precise, non-reactive trajectory, matching the Kyler's designated docking manifold with astonishing accuracy, suggesting intimate knowledge of hegemonic engineering tolerances. The airlock cycled open aboard the Arbiter Prime. The atmosphere within the docking bay was adjusted to a neutral pressure and humidity level, though Kalaris had ordered the local gravity generators subtly increased by 1%. A nearly imperceptible physical imposition designed to communicate superior environmental control. 3 figures emerged from the human shuttle. They were bipedal, covered in synthesized, form-fitting uniforms of muted gray and blue, utterly lacking the flowing robes or intricate bioluminescent markings common among diplomatic cadres of the recognized galactic community. They were physically smaller than the Kyler, and significantly smaller than the Viridian representatives, yet they moved with an economy of motion that suggested immense latent energy held in absolute reserve. Their faces, exposed to the regulated atmosphere, were striking in their lack of overt secondary sexual characteristics or tribal markings, simple, symmetrical structures dominated by large, forward-facing optical sensors, eyes that observed everything with chilling clarity. The central figure, presumably the lead envoy, carried nothing. No translator device, no data slate, no ceremonial offering. He simply walked onto the Kyler docking floor. Kalaris stepped forward, his posture projecting measured calm, the Kyler equivalent of an unmovable tectonic plate. He initiated the standard diplomatic greeting sequence, the synthesized voice modulator in his throat preparing to deliver the complex protocol introduction in flawless, ancient high galactic. The human spoke first, cutting through the protocol with unnerving ease. His voice was the same deep, resonant frequency that had boomed from the resolution, yet now intimately close, laced with the slight, almost imperceptible harmonics of genuine air vibration. Ambassador Kalaris of the Kyler hegemony, the human stated, using the correct honorific designation for the supreme diplomatic entity present. He did not ask, he recognized. We acknowledge the adjustment in local gravity. It is inefficient for sustained human physiology, but we understand the intent. We are here to speak with your leadership concerning matters of galactic stability and sovereign delineation. My designation is Ambassador Jian Li. The sheer efficiency of the introduction dismantled Kalaris's opening gambit entirely. The human had bypassed the entire ritual, identified the key representative, recognized the subtle power play, and countered it with a single, brief assertion of dominance through observation. Kalaris halted his prepared speech mid-articulation. The advisors behind him registered a sharp spike in anxiety readings. Ambassador Li, Kalaris managed, adjusting his own internal metrics to compensate for the shock. Your vessel's arrival was unanticipated. Your technological profile suggests a mastery far beyond your documented history. We require clarification regarding the nature of your species' rapid development. Li inclined his head fractionally, a gesture that could mean acknowledgement or dismissal, depending on the observer's context. Clarification will be provided, Ambassador, but within the established framework of mutual sovereignty. We are not here to present a scientific thesis. We are here to establish a functional relationship. Our primary concern is the immediate cessation of all hegemonic probes operating within the designated boundary region of the Kepler void, a region we claim as vital for our nascent expansion vectors. The Kepler void, a sparsely populated, resource-poor region traditionally used by the hegemony as a testing ground for long-range sensor platforms, claimed by the humans. That region is under the provisional observation mandate of the hegemony's oversight tribunal, Kalaris countered, regaining a measure of diplomatic footing by citing established, ancient law. Your arrival does not automatically negate pre-existing territorial demarcation protocols. Li took one slow step closer, moving entirely outside the traditional diplomatic buffer zone Kalaris had implicitly reserved. The human stopped just short of invading Kalaris's personal space, a deliberate violation of hegemonic non-contact doctrine designed to exert psychological pressure. Ambassador, Li continued, his voice softening slightly, though the underlying certainty remained bedrock. We are aware of your tribunal. We have analyzed its precedent structure for the last 1,400 standard cycles. Your laws are predicated on the assumption of predictable evolution. Right progression. We do not adhere to that assumption. Your probes, which you categorize as observation, we categorize as unilateral espionage. They cease operations immediately, or the resolution will assume hostile action against the nearest recognized hegemonic installation capable of coordinating those probes. That decision will be immediate, automated, and irreversible. The tension in the docking bay became so dense it felt like pressure washing over the Kyler delegates. Automated, irreversible hostile action based on surveillance cessation. It was an ultimatum delivered without threat, stated as a simple operational reality. Kalaris felt the cold hand of political reality clutch him. If the humans truly possessed the capability to neutralize hegemonic sensor nodes across vast distances instantaneously, a feat requiring mastery over localized space-time distortion that Kyler science deemed theoretical at best, then they held military superiority in this moment. And the Kyler, for all their ancient pride, prioritized survival and stability above all else. Ambassador Lee, Kalaris said, bowing deeply, an act that sent a tremor of shock through the watching Kyler fleet command. We acknowledge the validity of your immediate concern regarding surveillance. A full cessation order for all Kepler Void assets will be transmitted within 3 local cycles, pending immediate confirmation of your diplomatic status. Lee allowed a very subtle upward movement of the corner of his mouth, a facial gesture Kalaris recognized from anthropological studies as representing agreement, tinged with satisfaction. 3 cycles is acceptable. We will await confirmation in orbit. May we now transition to the official diplomatic forum. The transition was jarringly fast. Within moments, Kalaris, Lee, and his 2 silent companions were in the Arbiter Prime's grand chamber, a room designed to awe and intimidate any visitor with its vaulted ceiling, its towering crystalline pillars representing the pillars of Kyler governance, and the presence of the highest strategic minds of the hegemony, observing from elevated private alcoves. Ambassador Lee surveyed the room with an expression of detached interest, as if cataloging geological samples. He did not appear intimidated by the scale or the silent, judgmental presence of the assembled strategic council. His companions stood motionless beside him, 2 anchors of terrifying composure. High Sensor Vorlag, observing from his primary observation locus, initiated the formal contact sequence, overriding Kalaris. Vorlag's projection filled the center of the chamber, manifesting as a towering, regal shadow composed of shifting geometric light. Human Ambassador Lee, Vorlag's voice boomed, calibrated for maximum psychological effect, designed to convey the weight of interstellar law and millennia of structured civilization. You have forced an anomalous interaction. The hegemony requires understanding, not confrontation. Explain the discrepancy between your reported development curve and your current operational reality. Explain the fundamental nature of your species. Lee stepped forward, standing directly beneath the holographic projection of the sensor. The contrast was stark, the imposing, abstract light of Kyler authority looming over the singular, grounded presence of the human. Sensor Vorlag, Lee began, his voice carrying the same resonant clarity, betraying no deference. The discrepancy you observe is not an anomaly. It is a fundamental misunderstanding of our species' core processing mechanism. You measure technological advancement through the accumulation of observable external markers, energy output, resource utilization, societal cohesion, longevity. We measure it by the rate of problem-solving execution. Lee paused, letting the Kyler attempt to process this distinction. Xyleth, the anthropologist, was furiously cycling data on his internal link. Your history suggests prolonged periods of societal friction, Vorlag countered, his projection flickering slightly as the council struggled to integrate the human's logic. Conflict is the antithesis of resource dedication toward higher engineering. How did you achieve unified focus? Conflict is not the antithesis of focus, sensor, Lee stated, correcting the censor with casual authority. Conflict is the accelerant. The state you perceive as chaos, our internal struggles, our ideological divisions, our biological imperatives, these are not inefficiencies. They are our core processing units running parallel, high-variance simulations. When faced with an existential threat, or even a profound engineering challenge, the collective human organism dedicates all available cognitive resources to finding the singular, most efficient pathway to resolution, bypassing traditional bureaucratic inertia or philosophical deadlock. He looked up at the massive projection of Vorlag. You spend cycles establishing consensus. We spend cycles establishing. NG necessity. When survival is the absolute metric, ideology dissolves quickly. We did not achieve interstellar capability through slow, measured steps, censor. We achieved it by recognizing imminent collapse and engineering a bypass in a single, unified, species-wide surge of applied desperation. We build fast because we always assume the clock is running out. Rithos, the technological advisor, projected a hesitant query from the observation alcove. Your vessel, the resolution. It utilizes a propulsion methodology that appears to derive energy from localized space-time compression without the need for mass ejection. How is the energy containment managed without catastrophic resonance cascade? Lee responded without hesitation, turning toward the alcove. We do not contain the resonance, we harmonize with it. Traditional methods attempt to dampen the fundamental forces. We learned that dampening requires constant energy input and creates measurable structural weakness over time. Our approach involves tuning the vessel's hull matrix to resonate sympathetically with the zero-point field distortions inherent in warp transit. The containment field is not static. It is a dynamic, self-correcting harmonic structure maintained by quantum entanglement sequencing. In essence, the ship is designed to briefly become the instability, then return to local space. Kalaris felt a genuine chill that transcended atmospheric regulation. This was not mere technological advancement. This was a fundamental rewriting of applied physics, achieved by a species supposedly still grappling with rudimentary planetary management. They had skipped entire paradigms of theoretical physics. This implies an incredible level of intersubjective coordination among your engineering cast, Vorlag observed, his projections stabilizing, the fear hardening into cold strategic assessment. A unified understanding of such complex physics suggests a centralization of knowledge dissemination that contradicts the observational data of human internal governance structures. Indeed, Lee affirmed, this is where the political and the practical diverge. Our governance is messy, argumentative, and slow to form consensus on non-essential matters. But when faced with a single, undeniable external engineering requirement, such as the need to exit a dying stellar system, or the need to establish a secure border against external observation, the data flows freely. The species defaults to a collective analytical mode. We are functionally decentralized until the moment crisis demands absolute centralization, and we manage crisis with ruthless efficiency. The room fell silent again, but this silence was different. It was the silence of established rivals finally acknowledging the true measure of the other. The hegemony realized they were not dealing with primitives ready for assimilation. They were dealing with an entirely different evolutionary strategy, one predicated on explosive reaction rather than gradual accretion. Ambassador Lee, Kalaris finally spoke, setting aside the pretense of standard negotiation. If your species operates on such parameters of rapid, crisis-driven evolution, then your stated purpose for being here must be dire. You do not emerge from isolation merely to negotiate regional boundaries. What compels the Sol Confederacy to breach the established galactic quiescence with such overwhelming demonstration of capability? Lee met Kalaris's gaze, and for the first time the human expression shifted subtly. The detached interest was replaced by a profound, almost weary seriousness. Ambassador Kalaris, Lee began, and the tone changed. The certainty remained, but now it carried the weight of responsibility, not arrogance. The hegemony measures stability based on the preservation of its current order. We measure stability based on the preservation of potential. We did not travel this distance for political advantage. We traveled it because we have discovered a truth that demands immediate, unified comprehension across all established sentience. Lee gestured toward the rear of the chamber, where the tactical holoscreen displayed the vastness of the surrounding galaxy, the known domains, the charted routes, the familiar nebulae that formed the backdrop of Kyler civilization. For the last half-cycle, as we were mastering our transition to interstellar travel, we were simultaneously deploying deep-field, long-range telemetry arrays. Arrays that dwarf anything our neighbors or rivals possessed. We were not just looking for habitable worlds, we were looking for the structure of the local supervoid. He commanded the display to change. The familiar star charts vanished, replaced by an impossibly complex three-dimensional map woven from dark matter fluctuations and gravitational lensing data that made the Kyler own mapping efforts look like crude etchings on stone tablets. In the absolute center of this new map, where only empty, predictable space should have been, was a structure. It was vast beyond comprehension. Not a Dyson sphere, not a stellar engine, but a geometrically perfect void within spacetime itself. A structure so immense that its curvature subtly distorted the light from galaxies billions of light-years beyond. It was impossibly old, radiating no detectable energy, yet its presence exerted measurable gravitational influence across immense swathes of the galactic plane. This, Lee stated, his voice dropping to a near whisper that nonetheless filled the vast chamber, is what we found when we stopped focusing on the petty squabbles of our cradle system and truly looked outward. This structure permeates the galactic void. It is engineered, it is artificial, and it is consuming the baseline energy of the local cluster at an exponential rate. The Kyler Council members, masters of ancient knowledge, recoiled not from the presence of an enemy, but from the sheer, crushing weight of the unknown. This was not a political challenge. It was existential documentation. What is that configuration? Vorlag projected, his light form flickering rapidly, a sign of severe systemic overload. We do not know its full purpose, Lee admitted, but we know its effect. Its energy draw is accelerating. Based on our extrapolation of the decay rate of the surrounding cosmic background radiation, the faint echoes of the universe's birth, this structure has been active for an unknowable duration. And it is approaching a critical mass where its consumption will begin to destabilize the laws of physics within the local supercluster. It will not conquer us through force, censor. It will simply erase the conditions required for sentience to exist. The human ambassador stepped back, allowing the image of the encroaching, silent, engineered void to dominate the chamber. We established immediate FTL capability not to claim territory from the hegemony, but to secure the resources necessary to combat a threat that measures time in cosmic epochs, not political cycles. The Kepler void was essential for constructing our primary survey array. We needed to emerge quickly, decisively, and with full operational capacity because we could no longer afford the luxury of slow, measured evolution. We are here, Censor Vorlag, because your hegemony, for all its ancient wisdom and control, is facing a problem that your foundational understanding of physics cannot yet address. And we, Jian Li concluded, his gaze unwavering, are the only species that seems capable of building a solution fast enough. The weight of the reveal settled heavily upon the grand chamber. The arrogance that had defined the initial Kyler assessment evaporated, replaced by the cold terror of a species realizing its entire ordered existence rested upon a fragile foundation that an external, silent force was about to crumble. The humans were not primitive. They were the immune response, violently triggered by an unknown cosmic pathogen. The ensuing days were a blur of frantic, repurposed activity within the Kyler fleet structures. The internal political paralysis of the hegemony shattered instantly under the face of verifiable, immediate, species-ending threat. The nuanced debates over sovereignty and procedure were instantly rendered moot by the existence of the void structure. Ambassador Kalaris was granted unprecedented access to the highest strata of the Kyler High Council, a diplomatic elevation previously reserved only for threats of direct hegemonic annexation. He found himself coordinating strategy sessions not with the cautious viziers, but alongside tactical admirals and theoretical physicists who had previously dismissed human existence as irrelevant background noise. The human delegation, led by Jian Li, maintained their equilibrium. They operated with a chilling professional detachment, viewing the hegemony's vast resources and engineering expertise not as elements to be feared, but as necessary components in a massive collaborative project. They required access to Kyler's stellar engineering databases, particularly those relating to localized gravitational manipulation and long-term energy storage, fields the Kyler had mastered over millennia, but always within the constraints of known physics. Your containment fields are elegant, censor, Lee remarked during a grueling 90-hour operational briefing aboard the Arbiter Prime, the Kyler flagship now serving as the unified command center. He gestured at the holographic representation of a Kyler zero-point capacitor array, a device the hegemony considered functionally perfect. But they are designed to resist a force. Our proposed counter-mechanism requires us to imitate the force, not resist it. We need to replicate the ambient frequency of the void structure's energy sink, but inverted, a harmonic counterwave that forces its local spacetime structure to momentarily reject external energy. Kalaris leaning over the con. Sol understood the implication. The humans were not planning to destroy the structure. They were planning to teach it to reject their existence by overwhelming it with its own signature, inverted. It was a level of conceptual warfare that bordered on cosmic artistry. The energy requirements for such an inversion field, Ambassador Lee, Kalaris projected, his voice weary but determined, would necessitate the controlled discharge of the energy of several mature stars, focused onto a single point near the structure. Even with hegemonic reserves, the logistical strain is immense. Our political structures were not designed for such rapid resource expenditure. Lee turned, his eyes holding a startlingly empathetic, yet ultimately pragmatic light. Ambassador Kalaris, your political structures are now designed for survival. We have analyzed your governance models. They are slow, yes, but they are founded on a deep, shared respect for historical precedent and shared memory. We need you to leverage that shared memory. The cultural inertia that you feared was a weakness. You must convince your peers that this is not an external invasion, but the final, defining act of your history. The memory of your civilization is the fuel we need for the final push. The philosophical divide was narrowing, replaced by a mutual, desperate goal. The Kyler realized that the human strength lay precisely where they had perceived weakness, their capacity for immediate, total focus when existential stakes were presented. They were built for the emergency brake. The hegemony was built for the long cruise. Together, they formed a complete operational profile. Over the next several cycles, the combined fleet, now styled the Emergency Response Coalition, began its transit toward the structure. The human fleet, the initial contingent led by the Resolution, moved into a flanking escort position, their dark, silent hulls providing an unnerving visual contrast to the illuminated, complex geometries of the hegemony's armada. As they neared the periphery of the structure's measurable gravitational influence, the strain on the vessels became immense. Even the Arbiter Prime, built to withstand stellar flares, groaned under the pressure of distorted local space. The human vessels, however, remained eerily unaffected. The Resolution reports no deviation in internal systems, Kalaris communicated to Lee, who stood beside him on the bridge, monitoring the structural integrity of the Kyler flagship. Their construction materials are proving superior to our best models in high-distortion environments. They are built for stress, Kalaris, Lee replied calmly. The cradle world taught us the limits of material weakness early on. We learned to design around failure. The structure loomed larger. It was not a discrete object, but a region of absolute negative visibility, a sphere of non-existence carved out of the universe. It seemed to breathe, slowly expanding its influence, pulling in the background energy of the cosmos. The plan required precise timing. The Kyler fleet, utilizing centuries of accumulated mastery in gravimetric lensing, would establish a temporary, focused energy conduit, a massive, temporary wormhole of pure energy aimed directly at the structure's approximate equator. This energy surge was designed to overload the structure's localized absorption matrix momentarily. In that microsecond of hesitation, the Resolution would deploy the counterharmonic pulse, a wave of tailored exotic particles designed to resonate with the structure's internal decay mechanics, forcing a systemic rejection of its current energy state. All hegemonic assets maintain formation Beta-Delta 9, Kalaris commanded over the unified channel. Energy conduits charging. Ambassador Lee, confirm readiness for deployment. Lee responded immediately. Confirmed, the Resolution is locked on the target vector. We await the aperture. The process of charging the Kyler lensing array was slow, agonizingly meticulous. Every subsystem had to be balanced perfectly to prevent the massive energy discharge from creating a feedback loop that would vaporize the Coalition fleet instantly. The silence on the bridge was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic chime indicating energy saturation across the fleet. Charge at 80%, Kalaris reported, his internal sensors registering the strain on his core reactors. Vizier Thraxis reports minor structural anomalies in the outer deflection matrices of the escort contingent. They are holding. 90%, Kalaris continued. He felt the psychic weight of billions of Kyler beings, their history, their entire civilization, resting on this single, precise application of force. The window for deployment must not exceed 0.003 standard seconds, Ambassador Lee. If the aperture closes prematurely, the counterpulse will dissipate into the void with no effect. We have accounted for the dissipation rate, Lee assured. We will fire immediately upon detection of the peak energy signature transmitted through the aperture. Precision is our only defense here, Ambassador. 99.9%, Kalaris announced, his voice a strained monotone. Engaging primary aperture synchronization sequence now. A ripple of impossible light erupted across the Coalition fleet. The assembled power of the hegemony, channeled through precision-engineered gravimetric emitters, struck the empty space that constituted the structure's boundary. For an agonizing moment, nothing changed. Then, the structure reacted. It did not explode or shatter. Instead, the absolute darkness warped violently, spitting back a localized energy wave of raw, inverted gravitational pressure. The structure's automatic defense mechanism slamming against the incoming energy. Incoming pressure wave, Kalaris roared, overriding automated shields to manually route power to the central dampening field. The Arbiter Prime shuddered violently, the crystalline pillars within the bridge cracking under the strain, emitting sharp musical tones of structural compromise. Now Ambassador Lee, fire. From the center of the silent human formation, the resolution did not flash with fire or beam energy. Instead, a dome of utterly black, non-reflective matter seemed to momentarily encompass the vessel, and then it pulsed. It was not a visible emission, but a systemic, deep resonance that vibrated the very foundation of the Coalition fleet, passing through shields, armor, and biological forms alike. It was the sound of reality being politely, but firmly rejected. The effect on the void structure was immediate and profound. The vast, consuming sphere of non-existence stuttered. The local space-time distortion around it wavered, as if the entity responsible for maintaining its unnatural state had suffered a catastrophic internal system failure. The consumption of background radiation halted entirely. For one critical, sustained moment, the structure was inert, caught between its own internal mechanisms and the human counter-resonance. "It's holding," Lee shouted, his composure momentarily fractured by the sheer intensity of the event. "Maintain the field, Kalaris. We need sustained resonance for systemic rejection." The Kyler fleet, battered and critically strained, held the aperture open, bleeding energy reserves at a rate that would normally constitute total strategic defeat for any other species. They were pouring their civilization's essence into holding a door open for the humans to apply their strange, beautiful, chaotic physics. Then the structure began to recede. It didn't move away. The space it occupied was, slowly but surely, returning to normal cosmic parameters. The unnatural void shrank, pulled apart not by explosion, but by the reassertion of standard universal laws. After what felt like an eternity compressed into a few terrifying minutes, the resonance faded. The structure was gone, dissipated back into the background noise from which it had been engineered. The area was empty, filled only with the scattered debris of spent energy and the exhausted fleet of the Emergency Response Coalition. Kalaris leaned heavily against the command console, watching the final sensor readings normalize. The hegemony had survived the ultimate test. "It is done, Ambassador Lee," Kalaris stated, the relief making his voice momentarily uneven. "The threat is neutralized, your methodology. It was beyond our theoretical modeling." Lee turned back to Kalaris, his features composed once more, though the strain of the high-intensity focus was visible in the slight tightness around his eyes. "It is done for now, Ambassador. The structure was a symptom, not the cause." Kalaris straightened, the fatigue momentarily forgotten, replaced by the instinctive caution of the Kyler mind reasserting itself. A symptom. Ambassador, that entity was manipulating the fundamental fabric of reality on a scale that should not be possible for any single localized consciousness. Lee gestured toward the coordinates where the structure had been, now just standard, empty space. It was indeed manipulating reality, but it was not the primary actor. It was a gigantic, incredibly ancient, passive energy drain. And look at the vector of its expansion, Kalaris. It was expanding outward from a single point. He commanded the tactical display to re-render the cosmic map from the initial reveal, but this time, focused only on the residual energy decay patterns left by the structure's dissipation. The pattern was not random, it was directional. The structure was a massive, localized energy anchor, Lee explained, his voice grave. Something was using it as a tether point, a massive battery draining the background energy of this entire supercluster to power something else, something further away. When we inverted the energy signature, we didn't destroy the battery, we severed the tether. And now the source of that tether is aware that its remote power station has been disconnected. Lee brought up the final piece of data, a faint, structured signal, almost completely buried beneath the noise of the initial energy discharge, but now clearly discernible thanks to the sudden localized energy normalization in the wake of the structure's collapse. It was an ancient, deliberate broadcast signature, impossibly powerful, emanating from the far side of the galactic barrier, directed precisely at the coordinates where the structure had just vanished. This signal has been broadcasting since before your hegemony even achieved rudimentary metallurgy, Lee continued, his tone now one of profound, cosmic melancholy. It is not a challenge. It is not a threat. It is a status update, repeated endlessly across the void, designed to inform the primary entity that the local power conduit is offline. The message itself, once quickly processed by the combined Kyler/human analytical engines, was chilling in its simplicity, rendered into universal standard galactic dialect. Conduit fails, localized sentience detected, rerouting primary harvest vectors, prepare for direct contact response. Kalaris stared at the message, the accumulated wisdom and political power of the Kyler hegemony suddenly feeling like dust motes against an approaching storm. They had feared an unknown rival, only to discover they had inadvertently provoked an ancient, unimaginably powerful entity that viewed entire civilizations as mere potential energy reserves. They were not observing us, Kalaris whispered, the revelation tearing through his millennia of cultural conditioning. They were farming the background energy of our entire local bubble, using that structure as a slow siphon. Precisely, Lee confirmed, stepping closer to the Kyler ambassador. And now they are coming to reclaim their lost resource and to eliminate the pests that interfered with the harvest. We bought ourselves time, ambassador. Perhaps a few subjective years, maybe less, before their primary response fleet arrives. But we have done something no other species has dared in this epoch. We have forced a unified, intelligent response from the most dangerous entity in the known cosmos. He placed a hand, briefly, on Kalaris's armored shoulder, a gesture of unprecedented intimacy between species, bridging the gap between the fearful, logical architects of the hegemony and the desperately efficient engineers of Earth. The skirmish is over, Ambassador Kalaris. The war has just begun, but now we fight together. Your ancient understanding of scale, combined with our willingness to break the rules of reality, that is the only chance we have against the true architects of this silence. The assembled Kyler Council watched the human ambassador. The fear remained, a cold, deep current, but it was tempered now by something new, respect for the raw, terrifying capability of a species forged in the crucible of self-made crisis. They had underestimated humanity's chaos, only to find that chaos was the most effective weapon against the cold, ordered tyranny of the deep void. The galaxy, silent for so long, had just screamed its awareness, and the response would be apocalyptic. But for the first time, the Kyler did not face it alone.